Yes, so I'm here to talk about a field study that we carried out last summer and a little bit the summer before. In 2014, we were asked to investigate water temperatures, low water temperatures for swimming events by the International Triathlon Union, the International Olympic Committee and FINA, the governing body of world swimming. So the field study was part of this investigation. Yep, got it. So open water swimming is a huge sport around the world. Hopefully you're all glued to your screens for the Olympics. We had the 10-kilometre marathon swim and 1,500-metre swim for the triathlon, which were both fantastic spectacles off Copacabana Beach. Both sports also have an international elite series and national elite series, and both sports are enormous mass participation events. In the USA alone, last year there were over 500,000 members of USA Triathlon. So 14 deaths in triathlon between 2006 and 2008, it's not a large proportion. Nearly all of them happen in the swim. Mike was talking about this yesterday. It's likely to be more related to cardiac events than anything else. Our investigation was not looking at that. This is a field study looking at deep body temperature and the impact that cold water might have on those swimmers in a deeper way, and the effect it has on their swimming and the effect it has on their deep body temperature. So, existing rules for elite swimming, FINA rules, are that you can swim in, races happen in water temperatures from 16 to 31 degrees. They are all non-wetsuit events at the moment. Triathlons will be raced in water from 13 degrees. Wetsuits are compulsory at that temperature, but wetsuits are actually optional between 14 and 20 degrees for elites. For mass participation events, the rules can be anything. People run events to all distances, all ages, all abilities. Some will be wetsuit compulsory, some will be wetsuits banned. It entirely varied. So cold water swimming is different to simply being in cold water. We know that maintaining our deep body temperature in cold water is a significant challenge because of the very high heat capacity of water. But most studies on cold water immersion happen with static immersions. So I think Mike showed a picture of someone being sunk into a tank, laying across a bed. Static immersion. Swimming is different. And if we look at our little graphic on the left of the screen there, you can see our nice model of a person. We have the core, the muscle, fat and skin. To maintain the core temperature, vasoconstriction will limit the blood supply to the muscle, the fat and the skin. And that provides you with a nice insulative shell around that core to try and maintain that core temperature. When someone gets in the water and swims, you need to maintain the blood supply to the muscles. Swimming is a full body activity, so the blood supply is maintained to the muscles. Muscles are essentially completely useless for insulation in swimming. It means all that you're using for insulation is subcutaneous fat. So a leaner swimmer will have a massive disadvantage in maintaining that deep body temperature. So we have a couple of issues when we put swimmers in cold water. The first one is actually that the muscles may cool. So if the muscles cool, they become fatigued, they become less effective, and that's going to cause swim impairment. The swim stroke's going to become less efficient, swimmers are going to get tired more quickly, and eventually, if that carries on, there's the potential for swim failure. The second thing is obviously the deep body temperature. We class hypothermia as, mild hypothermia as when deep body temperature reaches 35 degrees. Now, if you look at the graph on the right of the screen, that was one of our triathletes in the lab in a separate study. It's a very typical pattern of deep body cooling. Initially, you see the temperature, the rectal temperature there actually goes up. And that's because of an increase in metabolic heat production as he starts to swim before a cooling gradient is established. You then have a conductive cooling gradient, and we see a linear fall in deep body temperature. That's very typical. If he was able to, he was a very lean swimmer, if he was able to insulate himself better, his metabolic heat production may have been enough that he didn't get the fall at all. Or if he was able to produce more metabolic heat, we may not have seen a fall in that situation. So the two offset each other. How individuals work, whether they will increase deep body temperature or lose deep body temperature, is one of the big questions we're asking. The other point is that after our swimmers get out of the water, there is some evidence that they continue to cool. Why, exactly what the mechanism is for that is not completely clear, but studies have repeatedly shown that the deep body temperature is at its lowest sometime after leaving the water. So that was another question we needed to look at. So our big question for our study, is it a safe swim? Firstly, can our athletes maintain their deep body temperature above hypothermic levels? 35 degrees, and that includes the after drop, the continued cooling after they've left the water. We needed to consider that as well. And quite important for a safe swim, can they actually keep swimming? We needed to look at swim impairment. Was swim impairment or complete swim failure likely to be a problem? We also had a few other considerations we would like to answer. Firstly, if we could produce a model which would predict in any given situation which swimmers are at risk of hypothermia, that would be a fantastic tool for event organisers, for coaches, for parents and swimmers themselves. We didn't know if elite swimmers would actually be more or less likely than ordinary swimmers to be at risk of either swim impairment or hypothermia. On the one hand, elite swimmers are leaner than a typical swimmer. On the other, they're far more experienced, they cover far more miles of swimming each week. They may be able to keep swimming sometime after their deep body gets cooler. They may be able to keep their muscles warmer. And we'd quite like to know the impacts of some other elements, what effect wetsuits have, ambient temperature, acclimatization, experience, that kind of thing. So, our field study, we went to 9 events in the UK and Canada. The water temperature ranged from 13 to 21 degrees. We went to elite-only events, a couple of World Series events in Canada, and we went to some mass participation events. The biggest of these was the Great North Swim in Windermere in the UK. There were wetsuit-only events, there were non-wetsuit events, and here are our swimmers. So we had 228 swimmers altogether, 108 female, 220 male. 134 were wearing wetsuits, 94 non-wetsuit or skin swims. We divided the ability level into 4 categories. There were elite, sub-elite, regular swimmers and novice swimmers. And the swim distances ranged from half a mile up to 32 kilometres. We divided the water temperature for purposes of analysis into 3 categories: less than 16, 16 to 18 degrees and over 18 degrees. Measurements, we had a massive range of variables to measure. So in the environment, we actually went out onto the course, either in a kayak or one of the event boats, and we took the water temperature at 3 depths at 10, 20 and 30 centimetres. Ambient temperature was measured with a wet bulb globe thermometer, wind speed was checked, and the current flow of the water. For our participants, we measured deep body temperature with a gastrointestinal pill, which is about the size of a large jelly bean. Participants swallow this, hopefully about 2 hours before the swim. That way it will have cleared the stomach, and if they take on any water while they're swimming, it won't affect the temperature readings. The pill gives off a radio signal, which we can pick up with a little handheld device if we hold it close to them. So we were picking up their deep body temperature immediately before the swim, immediately after the swim, and then about half an hour later. In bigger events, it was very difficult to get hold of people at an exact time. We measured their body mass. We took 4 skin fold measurements, biceps, triceps, a suprailiac on the hip, and a thigh measurement. And the reason we used those 4 is, firstly, they were a good correlation with sum of 8 skin folds, which we tried in the lab. but also in a field environment, privacy is limited. Those were all measurements we could take with people wearing normal swimming costumes. We measured their height, we checked their wetsuit use and measured the thickness and type of those wetsuits. And we looked at a questionnaire we got all our participants to complete, which covered acclimatization, experience, and ability. And we categorized them according to that. So we have, with all those variables, we have a huge amount of data, more than I've got time to share with you. But our initial outcomes, 228 swims, 226 did complete their swim. The 2 that didn't, one was suffering from breathing difficulties due to asthma, and the other was actually an elite swimmer who was from Colombia, and he felt a bit chilly and didn't like it and got out, but actually his deep body temperature was fine. He was very nice, but not into the cold. 14 reached hypothermic levels either immediately after or later on. 168 actually increased their core temperature during the swim. They had a higher temperature on exiting the water than when they got in. So much so that 9 were classed as hyperthermic. That's with a TGI greater than 39 degrees when they left the water. And 199 of the 228 did have their lowest TGI reading in the final check we did about half an hour to an hour after the swim. One of our swimmers, one elite swimmer, actually completed a swim with a TGI of 31.6 degrees, which I have been told is impossible, but it's not. He did. So we also observed a little bit of the event organisation, and we did find that the safety support in the water was without question excellent for all our swimmers. However, the facilities for re-warming after, given what we found with deep body temperature falling after the swim, were on the whole either poor or completely non-existent. There was very little, if any, supervision of the swimmers post-swim, even when we had junior elite swimmers in the water coming out very cold. And medical staff, where medical staff existed in the bigger or the very long events, the only temperature measurement available to them was an ear tympanic measurement, which is incredibly ineffective following swimming because of the water entering the ear. On the whole, the swimmers and the staff had very little understanding of what comprises safe rewarming after swimming. So we used our data to produce a couple of calculations to make it more useful. We did a rate of change of TGI, which was simply the change in TGI divided by the time spent in the water. That meant we could compare the longer swims with the shorter swims. And we did an individual single morphology rating for each of our participants, which is the surface area of the body divided by the mass divided by the sum of skin folds, which gives us a single reading which covers all the relevant morphology elements. On that measurement, taller, leaner swimmers will have the highest rating of morphology, something like 10, and shorter, fatter swimmers will have a very low number. So our first basic, these are all our temperature readings. We've got TGI plotted against morphology here, where the blue dots give you the TGI before the swim, orange after the swim, and the grey in the final check about half an hour later. So you can see quite clearly, on the whole, orange immediately after the swim are the highest readings, grey on the whole are lowest, but there is clearly no correlation with morphology for any of those 3 timings. When we looked at wetsuits, whether people were wearing wetsuits or not, we did find a significant difference between skins and wetsuit swimmers in the rate of change of TGI. Unsurprisingly, wetsuit swimmers tended to increase their TGI by more than skin swimmers. Unfortunately, that was the only variable which gave us any significant difference between categories. There was no difference between ability categories, gender categories, water temperature categories, or acclimatization, and stuck those graphs all in there for you, but there was simply no significant difference between them, which was unexpected. So what Then we looked at those people, the important people, the people whose temperature actually fell while they were in the water, and compared with those whose temperature rose in the water. And what we found is that those whose temperature fell with a negative rate of change of TGI were spending longer in the water and had a higher morphology rating. So that we did expect. And when we used multiple regression analysis to see if we could model the rate of change of TGI, to see if we could model which swimmers were most at risk, we found for skin swimmers that morphology, water temperature, an increased time in the water, increased age, and being female all meant a lower rate of change of TGI. But unfortunately, still, with all those 5 factors, only gave us a 47% prediction rate, which is effectively useless for the purposes of modelling. For wetsuit swimmers, most of those things weren't relevant at all. We only found time in the water and ability level had any influence at all in predicting rate of change of TGI, and that was an even worse prediction rate at 43%. So, with our conclusions, going back to our original questions, no, we couldn't model which swimmers would cool or how much they'd cool by. However, we did get some useful information from the study. The good news was that in these temperatures, these events where people are coming prepared, only a very small proportion of swimmers were actually at risk of hypothermia. The swim failure due to cold was not a problem for any of our 228 swimmers. Leaner swimmers are more likely to cool, regardless of acclimatization and experience. Unexpected, not. Wetsuits provide protection against cooling. The ambient conditions had no influence on the TGI of the swimmers, and that was not unexpected either. Swimmers are completely submerged in the water. We didn't really expect to see much difference from ambient conditions. And we did get confirmation that after drop is real. A swimmer is most likely to be at their coolest point around half an hour to an hour after they exit the water, not immediately leaving the water. So we did offer recommendations to event organisers, to our funding bodies, to be considered. Firstly, for safety purposes, the leanest swimmers are the ones you need to watch the most, as well as the ones who spend the longest in the water. But overheating was a problem for nearly as many swimmers as hypothermia. So that's something that event organisers should consider, particularly in the wetsuit swims, on hot days where people may be standing around in a black neoprene wetsuit in the sun for a long time before they swim. Mike discussed the issue of swim starts yesterday, so I haven't gone into that here, but to consider making swim starts less of a shock for people. And then supervision and aftercare of swimmers is actually critical. This is the point when they are at their coldest, when most of them are thinking about getting in a car and driving off, or going and getting on a train on their own. So actually encouraging swimmers to stay at the venue for up to an hour after their swim, offering some facilities, teas and coffees, to encourage them to stick around is a really good idea. And offering safe rewarming facilities and educating people as to what safe rewarming consists of. In the longest and coldest swims, and I'm thinking here particularly the marathon swims or the 32-kilometre swim of crossing of Lac Saint-Jean that we attended, medical staff were there, medical staff more or less knew what they're doing, but they did not have accurate means of temperature measurement, and that should be made available to them. So thank you to our funding bodies, to all the participants and event organisers, one of whom is here. Thank you very much, Shannon. And in particular, the data collection volunteers who gave up whole weekends to stand by the side of a lake, taking people's GI measurements and skin folds. And that, if anyone is in any doubt, is why people take part in open water swimming. Thank you.